All right, it is day 12. 12. Or is that 12? That looks like 15, 14. I don't know. Anyway, it's day 12 of the Brew Crew Advent Calendar 2022 Extravaganza. Day 12. We're halfway through. This is the halfway point. And today brings us another special beer handpicked for us by our friends at the Barrel House, who did a great job. This is a unique beer also in the lineup in that I don't think there's another beer like this of this sort or type particularly. So here we go. We're going to dive into it right now, and I'm going to crack it open here and give you a little perspective on it. So today's day 12 Advent Calendar brew is another brew by Derive Brewing Company. This one is called The Lost Leatherman. It is an English dark mild. There's kind of the can art. I'm sure John did a great job of handling that before, and maybe in his podcast segment. Lost Leatherman. It's kind of upside down. Interesting label. It's a picture of, well, Edward Scissorhands, but instead of scissors, it is a Leatherman. Surprise. What a shock. Anyway, this libation comes to us from, again, Derive, which we've had one of Derive's offerings earlier. They're a brewery based out of Columbus, Ohio. This one is based on a traditional English dark mild. It comes in at 4.2% alcohol level, so that's fairly tame by comparison, but there's a story, of course. There's always a story behind this beer, behind this type of beer, and I'll go into that a little bit in a little bit here. So straight up the middle, English dark mild brewed with premium English roasted malts. So I'm going to crack this open. 3, 2, 1. Now, something to note about an English dark mild that actually came from English developed a type of beer called the mild ale. It is an ale. It's interesting that they call it mild because mild doesn't mean what we necessarily think it means in today's terms. It doesn't mean mild in terms of lower alcohol content or what have you, smoother beer. It actually meant mild was meant to be. It was originally made with pale malts, like a pale ale. So it was supposed to be a lighter color than a porter or brown ale. Similar to an English bitter, if anyone knows what that is. I think we had a bitter last Advent, or a pale ale. But distinct from those, it was called a mild because the English described beers in the class called mild as referring to freshly brewed, unaged beers. So that's what mild meant to them at the time. But ironically, a mild ale was originally stronger in alcohol content than it is today. It was upwards of around 6% and sometimes higher, and breweries often brewed 2 or 3 different versions of them with increasing strengths, and they designated them by the letters X, double X, or triple X. So that was kind of what a mild was. It was definitely higher in alcohol content to a pale ale of the time, or even an English bitter at the time. It rivaled IPAs at the time, but had different characteristics to it. So how we got English dark milds was a creation of World War I. So World War I came around, and England, like many other countries, the United States in World War I and World War II, had rationing going on. And so the beers were rationed in terms of, or sugar was rationed, so that you could only have so much alcohol content in a beer, because they needed those the malts for bread and other things to supply the war effort, and they needed other sugar for any residual sugar that a brewer was going to throw in there. They needed that for other things too. So they limited it. So the alcohol content of a mild dropped, as well as other beer styles, right? And it went down to like something like 3 to 4.5% around that time. After World War One, and it was darkened. Basically, they added darker malts, and they roasted some cheaper malts, because the good barley malt was going to the war effort as well for bread and other, flour and other stuff. So they either roasted other malts that were cheaper, of less quality malt, or they had darker colored malts that they were putting into it. So created the English dark mild, right? The brewers also added brown sugar or caramel, while the gravity meaning the alcohol content was limited by the laws of the wartime restrictions, gravity increased again, alcohol content increased again after the war. But then when World War II hit, 10, 15 years later, it dropped back down again for the same exact reasons. So mild ale kind of lost popularity in England, except for in a few certain spots. And not very many examples survive today, and not many examples at all are exported. So you don't see very many English milds or English dark milds anymore in the United States. There's a few exceptions to that. You all know Newcastle Brown Ale. That's a mild. That's a dark English dark mild. And Samuel Smith's Nut Brown Ale, which is also pretty popular in the States, but it's not easy to find. That's also an English dark mild. The gravity or alcohol content has stayed fairly low. In modern day, there's a lot of American brewers that like Derive that are making a mild style beer in the classic sense, trying to stay true to the original English dark mild and dark milds as they are even today. So, but the gravity is still down around 3 to 4.5%, and this one, as I said, was 4.2%. So that's how that all came to be. So it started off being a much stronger beer, has ended up being somewhere around about where pale ales are, right in that same category. But they've left the dark roast in there to give it a unique flavor. So it's not a lager, it's not a dark lager, it's definitely an ale. It's just it's in the nut brown ale kind of category. But it's not, it's not. There's it's interesting. It's a little confusing sometimes, because there is a separate category called a brown ale, which is separate from a mild. I think brown ales typically have a little bit higher alcohol content, and there's a few other things there too. But anyway, so what you'll see in a dark mild is typically a color that looks like this, darker color. It's not real thick. It looks like it is here, but it's really, it's really a fairly, it's like a regular ale consistency, thickness, viscosity. It's very similar to a regular ale. It's just a darker color. One more thing to note about this. You'll taste the things that you typically taste when roasted ale is thrown into the mix. Like when you drink a stout or a porter, you get some of those coffee notes. You get sweet caramel, molasses, maybe some chocolate, some licorice, some nuttiness maybe, and a roasted kind of a flavor. You'll get those flavors in a dark mild. So we'll probably taste that right now as well. One more thing to note, they're very lightly hopped. So you won't get much hop characteristic at all out of a dark mild. It won't be, it's not a hoppy beer. So you'll taste more, it'll tend towards, sweeter maltiness of the mild ale. So anyway, all that said, let's get to the fun part. All right, here we go. It's definitely got that Newcastle kind of nut brown ale kind of flavor. I taste a lot of nuttiness and coffee kind of tones to it, some chocolate notes. And that's not because they added it to it. That's just because those are the characteristics of the roasted malt that they brewed in there that have fermented. So anyway, that's the initial flavor. Some molasses. I taste maybe some molasses and caramel flavors as well in there. It's got a definite. It's definitely one. I like English ales a lot. Um, I studied for a year in England, and I had a chance to drink a lot of great beer when I was over there. In fact, at the time, I was used to the sort of American beers of the time, Budweiser, Miller, Bush at the time, and others that that we have had come to back, in the early '80s, had come to expect as this is just what beer tastes like. And my eyes were open when I went to England, and I got all these great fuller bodied, richer tasting ales, and which we don't even have many ales in this country at that time. And even their lagers were more flavorful. So I really fell in love with the English beers. It was kind of the first taste, literally, of any beer that had been brewed outside of the United States, and I really fell in love with them from because they just had so much more character and a more interesting flavor profiles to them. So I really like dark miles and miles generally, and I really like this one as well. It's a great example, and it's a rare thing to find one of these. You just don't find that many of them, period. So when I compare this to some of the other beers that we've drank, it's really hard because the styles are so very different between a lot of these beers that I have a hard time, ranking it and scoring it against some of those other ones. Now, if you're looking for spectacular, it's not spectacular. But if you're looking for different and interesting and flavorful, and in my mind, very tasty, it wins in all those areas. So I would definitely drink this again. I would definitely drink this on a regular basis if I had access to it. I like it that much, so it's definitely over a three. It's definitely not going to be a five for me, but it's going to be one of those beers that is is very high on the list. It's way above average. It's a great example of a dark mild. There are going to be those in our group that probably don't appreciate or care for this drink as much as some of the other more current modern styles like sours and smoothie types of beers, those sorts of things. But this one, from a classic perspective, it's a home run. It hits it, it hits it up the middle to the deep center, and you really can't go wrong with this beer. There's nothing overtly unusual or harsh about this beer. It's very well balanced. It's got a really nice long finish. It's got sweet notes throughout, but it's balanced with the roast in the malt. It's just lovely. It's just lovely to drink. It's just a really good drinkable beer. It's going to be around a 4 for me, I would say. Probably a 4.0. I'm going to give it a 4. Could be higher than that if it were just probably even a little bit more. It's got a kind of a dry finish to it a little bit, so it's not real long on the finish. And I would say, if it lingered a little bit longer on the palate on the way down, and had a little bit longer finish, I think I'd probably rate it a little bit higher. But nothing wrong with this one at all. So very good. It's not too heavy. It's not too syrupy. It's not too overwhelming. It's not too sweet, so that you can't drink too little, but you can only drink one of them, for example. We've had several of those that we've had already this Advent season, but I think it really it hits a solid, double or triple. I'm going to come back. I think I said home run before, but it definitely it's definitely a great beer. I get a 4.0, and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So interested in seeing how the rest of you, my fellow Chuggalos, rank this thing and how you guys like it. I am kind of more into the more traditional styles, and I like the variety that we've got in our Advent calendar because we got a lot of those. We've got a lot of different things going on. We've had lots of really interesting. We had a Vienna lager. That's a real traditional style. It goes way back. Predates the English dark mild or the English miles, that's for sure. We've had a lot of other really great beers. We have straight up IPAs and double IPAs and some great lagers too. So anyway, that's it for me from day 12. Really enjoyed this one. 4.0 from me. Looking forward to tomorrow and seeing how you all rank this one here. And I'm also looking forward to coming up on the 17th, 5 days from now. 5 days. Can you believe that? Coming up this weekend, actually, we're all going to get together and we're going to raise one, and we're going to have some really great beer planned for day 17. And we also, I'm sure we'll have some extra goodies and surprises on that day for all of us to taste. So really looking forward to it. Can't wait to see you guys. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying this Advent season and holiday season. Cheers to y'all, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Bye now.